Busy action this morning at Silverstone. We continue now, but we wind back the clock to when Silverstone was not yet a racing circuit, to the pre-war sports cars and the BRDC 500. Grid for the BRDC 500 race sees the Fraser-Nash TT rep of Gregor Fiskin and Patrick Blakeney-Edwards starting on pole from the enormously well-driven Alvis Firefly Special of Rudiger Friedrichs. An Alta and a Delahaye on row 2, a Talbot and another Fraser-Nash on row 3 of this multi-faceted grid. Behind them, the first of the Aston Martins, the Red Dragon Speed Special, and two Bentley 3.4.5s, and another Aston Speed model rounding out the top 10. Rileys, Bentleys, Morgans, Talbots, Alphas, and a whole host of others come together to make up what is a very, very varied grid. So racing for the BRDC 500, these cars, as in period, race very close to standard production specification. They're in road-going trim as well, so they all have lights and mudguards. They run on standard pump fuel, and although they are modified for racing, particularly in terms of safety, it is the great pre-war marques: Alfa Romeo, Alvis, Aston Martin, Bentley, Bugatti, Fraser-Nash, Lagondas, MGs, Riley, Talbot, and a host of others in 7 vintage classes based on their age and their engine capacity. So it is a mouth-watering selection of fabulous machinery, all of which dates back very nearly 100 years. Martin Haven and Alistair sitting alongside me, Alistair Douglas. I mean, whenever you come racing at Silverstone, whatever era you came racing in, Silverstone's always had an eye for a good historic race, and cars like these, from the very first day I came to watch motor racing, were already elderly cars. Now, some of the cars that we see racing hadn't even been created, but these cars are going to take on this Grand Prix circuit. 40 minutes for these near century-old cars is going to be a pretty demanding ask. Ready for the rolling start of the BRDC 500, the race here at the Classic for these pre-war sports cars. Another enormous grid, more than 30 nearly 100 years old cars, and Gregor Fiskin on pole position, making a slightly tentative getaway. Rudiger Friedrichs sweeping around the outside in the Alvis Firefly Special. It is Rudiger Friedrichs in the more upright of the cars who gets the advantage. The chain gang Fraser-Nash TT replica behind. Gregor Fiskin, who shares with Patrick Blakeney-Edwards in second. Gareth Burnett in the Alta, and a looping spin there for the Talbot 105 right behind. And that is the car, I think, of Michael Birch, who started in 5th, one of the original Roche Talbot factory cars. And he's having to wait now for the entire grid to go round, and you can see the lights and the mudguards. These cars, as they were in period, not too far away from production specification as they are in race trim.
Yes, Michael Birch unfortunately spinning there on the first lap, but down to the other end of the Wellington Straight, as Michael recovers at the top end of our picture, is the leaders coming round, and a very, very good start, as you say, the Alvis Firefly, driven by Rudiger Friedrichs, who's won this type of race a number of times before. The car in second place, as they went away from the line, the car that was on pole position, the normal car, a car owned by Fred Wakeman, but Fred not driving it today. It's actually driven by Gregor Fiskin, and normal co-driver Patrick Blakeney-Edwards will take over, and that's actually dropped to third place, and I think up into second. Is it the Delahaye of Ross Keeling? Yep. I think will yes, yep. I think it is, that's come through. The
French blue Delahaye, there it is in second place with its wide stance, and behind it, recovering a little bit, is the TT Fraser-Nash replica. Well, the Fraser-Nash TT replica, the Fraser-Nash with its chain-driven rear, and a little bit dangling off the side of the Delahaye there. That is is not necessarily entirely what they would have hoped for.
That's the Alta.
That's the Alta, in fact. Yes, it is.
It is. Another driver, Gareth Burnett, who again has had a number of wins in this car in this type of racing.
And he's slowing right down dramatically. Whatever it was, some metallic strip from under the car has started rubbing on the rear wheel, and he can hear something. Don't forget, these cars are 95, 100 years old, most of them, so he can hear something very odd at the back of the car. He doesn't know what it is, but he's taking no chances. So something has come loose, and Gareth Burnett in that RAF blue Alta coming very slowly now down the pit straight. And look at the Bentley comes by, one of a number of 3-litre Bentleys, upgraded with a 4.5-litre engine for racing. You can see all sorts of different shapes here. You've got Aston Martin team cars, you've got Aston Martins and Altas, and there one 3-wheeler. You can see Sue Derbyshire rather, in her Morgan Super Aero, the Morgan 3-wheeler. Bugatti Type 35s, all sorts of different shapes and sounds here. Riley's, Tolbo Largo, there's a classic Bentley look. And these cars, again, even as a modern car, really thunder along. That's the Hudson Morley Bentley 3-litre 4.5. And again, the big engine, small car theory held true 100 years ago, just as it does now. Bentley 3-litre was never a small car, but there was a bigger engine that came along later. So stick it in the smaller chassis and produce a nimble and quick racing car.
And Gareth Burnett making his way back through past those Bentleys as we watch them. Gareth Burnett in that light blue car just going out of shot. He's making his way back up towards the front, one of our quicker cars. It looked like when he went onto the grass, Martin, that bit of trim, whatever it was, actually was knocked off, and I think he realised and then got going again. So he should make his way back towards the front of the field.
I know nothing about the underside of a pre-war Alta, but I can't imagine what long flat strip of metal there is there and what it would have covered that is no longer going to fall off. Well, there is Sue Derbyshire, the Morgan 3-wheeler, in a slightly different form. In fact, it's gone through a number of forms, but still in production. There is a new Morgan 3-wheeler coming, not with an aero engine out front, or not with an air-cooled engine out front, as this has the V-twin, and that, of course, was its very famous layout. They then introduced recently a new V-twin front-engined Morgan 3-wheeler and an electric version, and there is a new 3-wheeler on its way from the factory, which is still producing cars in Malvern in Worcestershire, as it always did. Well, Rudiger Friedrichs is away and gone. Here is the Delahaye that we initially thought was in second place, a little bit more upright, the Ross Keeling and Callum Lockie Delahaye. And that classic French blue, as you can see, with the mudguards cross-braced to make sure that they stay where they should do instead of falling down on the car. In road trim, it would have had running boards between the front and the rear wheels, which helped keep your clothes clean when you stepped into the car, and also helped keep your clothes clean when you were in the car, so the front wheels didn't throw muck up all over you. And all with lights and running gear. Of course, in the early days of Le Mans, cars like these would have had to have had all the wet weather gear as well. The first hour of the Le Mans 24-hour race, you had to run with your roof up. Now, all of these cars, as you can see, do not have solid roofs. That was a while in coming. They all would have had a canvas roof. And so your canvas roof, like your traditional soft-top car, would need to stay up for the first hour of the race. If it didn't, you were forced to pit to have it fixed.
We can see Sue Derbyshire there, you mentioned, in the 3-wheeler Morgan, chasing these much larger cars. She's very low to the ground and wearing motorcycle leathers because she's driving that 3-wheeler Morgan more like a motorcycle, hanging out of the side of the car. Always good to watch Sue Derbyshire, very quick indeed. The car, you might be surprised to know, it's only got 2 gears because it's chain driven, so it's 2 chains, 2 sprockets. The first gear 0 to 70 miles an hour. And Sue will be probably in second gear now, which will take her from 70 to 105 miles an hour. Don't count her out for a really top placing. She won quite a prestigious series only last weekend in this car, run throughout the season. So really experienced driver. And as Martin mentioned earlier, the V formation twin-engined air-cooled engine hung out at the front of the car. A great one to go and have a look at in the paddock. Anyway, all of these pre-war cars good to look at in the paddock because most of the mechanicals are on view.
Well, and that is the great thing about a pre-war car, is that you know, the mechanical concept of the car hasn't changed much, but it's so much more visible in these cars. Of course, the air-cooled engine there out front in the Airstream, the perfect place for it. It gets all the fresh air. And you can see Sue Derbyshire changing gear with her right hand on the outside of the car, so you'll be able to see when she goes from first to second and back. Here's our race leader then, Rudiger Friedrichs, at the Alvis Firefly Special. Now, Alvis, a very big pre-war mark, and in fact continued through into the 60s. The red triangle logo on the car, they were built in Warwickshire, and in fact Alvis and Red Triangle still not only supply spares, but have restarted car manufacture in Warwickshire, looking to introduce new Alvis. Rudiger Friedrichs in one of their earlier models, the Firefly Special. And again, you can imagine this car with a lot more in terms of weather protection, running gear and so on, but with cycle mud guards for racing and stripped down as light as they can. And with all of these cars, the terminology probably correctly is that you sit on the car rather than in the car. You are quite some way from the ground. There's at least enough room, well, pretty much under most of these cars for the Morgan to go underneath as well as around either side. They're a big old bus.
You certainly know what Rudiger's doing, don't you? Because you can see him working away there, and it's great to see. It might be a little bit slower than some of the other cars we've seen, but no less effort from the driver. He's coming up here to a fast right and a left. He leans out to try and get his weight over on the right-hand side of the car. Then he'll swing to the left through Farm and then up to the tight right-hander. Now, when he comes up to Village here, you'll probably see him almost step out of the car. There he goes, right over to the right hand side, takes both his hands to the right hand side of the very large steering wheel and then turns into the left. It's quite a physical job he's doing, isn't it? And also controlling the car on the throttle as well, of course, just letting it drift through the corners.
And that's one of the great joys of these cars, is so much is visible. Of course, the driver not hemmed in by halos, harnesses or anything else. In the early days of motoring, in fact right through until the late 70s, drivers always preferred not to be around the car in the scene of an accident. Being thrown out was always infinitely preferable to being trapped in it, because a hot car and a leaky fuel tank did not make for a very nice place to be stationary, particularly if you were unconscious, concussed or injured. So yeah, it took a long while to persuade drivers to wear seatbelts in racing cars for exactly that reason. Rudiger Friedrich has none of that. Seatbelts hadn't really been invented by that stage. He leads quite comfortably. The Delahaye in second place still. The Fiskin, I beg your pardon, the Chain Gang Fraser Nash now up to second. The Fiskin and Blakeney Edwards car, and the Delahaye down to third place. There's Sue Derbyshire, as you can see from the timing pylon, in seventh place. And not just leading her class, but harassing in fact she is leading her class, one of 7 different classes, harassing the car in front of her, which is car number 21, Alan Middleton, in the Aston Martin Speed Red Dragon. She gets alongside, gets the run going. The Aston, the number 21 car, although it's called Red Dragon, that was after its original owner, but it is a green Aston Martin Speed Special and should have the legs, but does not. Sue Derbyshire has the grip on the inside to stay in front into Copse Corner, so she is up to 6th position now, and the Aston Martin will have to try and stretch its legs down the hanger straight to come back at her. But he's got company from behind as well. Right behind him is the number 32 car, which is Alexander Hewitson's Riley. So Riley TT Sprite replica. And the TT replica is not modern cars that were built to emulate something from the pre-war era. They are pre-war cars that were built to replicate cars that the manufacturers have had success with, particularly in this case, and in the case of the Fraser Nash Chain Gang cars, in the Tourist Trophy races, the most prestigious races for sports cars in the pre-war era. So the TT Fraser Nash replica and the Sprite TT Rep are both cars that were built in period, in the style of, although not necessarily with all the performance of, their successful racing cars. And that's something, that trend of building a road replica of a racing car has never really gone out of fashion, has it? There's all sorts still being produced.
The number 21, you mentioned the Red Dragon. That was actually originally driven by Richard Seaman, who went on to be a Grand Prix driver. This is pre-war, of course, a Grand Prix driver for the Mercedes team, and lost his life at the Spa circuit. But he originally drove that number 21, and then it became called the Red Dragon when it went to its second owner, Dudley Folland, who's a Welshman. And here it is racing all those years later. Seaman drove that car in the Ards TT, the Tourist Trophy in Northern Ireland, in 1936. 1936, unbelievable. And here it is, still racing flat out, chasing after the 1929 Morgan three-wheeler of Sue Derbyshire.
Oh, and on the inside here comes the Alvis TT rep, doesn't quite get through. The Riley TT rep, rather, struggling there just to tighten up the line to avoid the Aston Martin, so didn't quite get the move completed. Sue Derbyshire in the Morgan is gone, goes down from second to first to come round the tight infield section here in front of the BRDC suite. And Dick Seaman racing that Aston Martin as a private entry in the Ards TT in 1936. By 1938 he was a factory Grand Prix driver for Mercedes. So he certainly sprung to prominence in a big way. Now here is sort of almost the encapsulation of a famous Russell Brockbank cartoon, with a big Bentley charging up behind a small Citroën Presse was the slightly tongue-in-cheek caption of it. But the big Bentley there manages to squeeze its way through with no problems past. And what's that as it comes past us? I'm struggling with my pre-war sports car identification. The Bentley is an easy spot. That's a 3 litre with a 4.5 litre engine now.
That's Robert Beebe's Fraser Nash behind him.
Aha, right, okay, so that is a change for position as well. So the Fraser Nash was in 6th place, is now in 6th place, and that's a change for 5th and 6th. So a big Bentley battle coming down the straight.
The Fraser Nash, also a chain-driven car, like the Morgan just behind. But it has a few more gears. But yeah, however many gears you have in the car, you have to have that many chains as well. So it's quite a busy undercarriage on that car, and they're all charging away underneath the driver with just a kind of a wooden floor in there. It's
yes,
all a bit worrying, really.
It is a little bit, isn't it? You sort of blithely say, yes, chain driven, yada, 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 and then you see what it looks like, and as you say, it is literally right behind the driver's backside, and you think, okay, I suppose in a way it's probably no more or less likely to let go than a prop shaft in a 90-year-old plus car, but it does feel a little bit more fragile, perhaps.
Yeah, chains tend to flail around when they break, don't they? Whereas a prop shaft might just fall off. But yeah, he's got back through, hasn't he? Past Morley. So yeah. Clive Morley driving the Bentley number 22, one of the Morley family who have been building and preparing Bentleys in their farm shed for as many years as anyone would like to remember. And Clive actually getting a little bit out of shape there in the number 22 Bentley 3.4.5, which means it's a 3 litre chassis, which somebody many years ago fitted a 4.5 litre engine to. Ever was it thus? Fit a bigger engine.
Well, the boys
go faster.
The boys are the 3rd generation of the Bentley Racing Morley family, aren't they? Father and grandfather also raced, as well as the two boys. So yes, they have got a shed full of Bentleys, which doesn't mean that they are enormously wealthy. It meant that their father and grandfather went out and bought them when they were not quite 10 a penny, but when they were just old cars that nobody wanted and nobody could fix. And so they bought a number over the years for almost pennies, particularly for sort of spares and bits and pieces to keep the ones they were enjoying racing. And then a whole workshop industry has grown up around preserving Bentleys for racing. Now, Sue Derbyshire with a problem, or is she...
Oh, she's past the pit lane entry. I was going to say she's coming into the pits for her stop, but no, she's got a problem. She's looking down beside the car. She's got a hand out to the cockpit. Then as now the universal sign that I have an issue, and that's a shame, because that happened just as you say. She was coming out of Luffield when she might have had the option to go into the pit lane. I think the fact that she had a 2-storey Bentley alongside her probably dissuaded her of trying to do that. But either way, it may well be that whatever ails the Morgan might not have been fixable. I wouldn't be doing that. She's going to go there into the
into the back of the collecting area.
Yeah, so there's a little area she can pull off safely there, which is a shame. I suspect she knows what the problem is. She and her husband prepare that car, and she may well know what the problem is and know it's not fixable.
Well, she's looking down to the right-hand side of the car, and not much is down there other than the gear selector, so that might well be the culprit. She is out, however. Pit window is open because, yes, this is a 40-minute race, but for a number of these cars, it will be a 2-driver race. So there will be some driver changes. You can see in the starters list. There's been a change for second place. The Delahaye has moved up to second, and now does that mean that the Fiskin and Blakeney Edwards car has come in for a pit stop? I think it does. Now here's one of the Aston Martin team cars, one of the Aston Martin Ulsters. Again, the name comes from success in racing in Ulster in the TT on the Ards Road circuit. And again, these cars would have raced at Le Mans in period, as they have done over a number of years in the Le Mans Classic.
And the pit stops, Martin, just briefly to tell you, we have a 15-minute window in this race, so it's open now, but the stationary time is only 15 seconds.
Wow.
And that's mainly because they're all open cars, so the drivers can, and there's no seat belts in the cars, so they can change over very quickly. So if we do get a chance to see any pit stops on screen, quite an exciting little 15-second moment for them.
But without the theatre that used to be the case, particularly in the early days of historic racing here at Silverstone and elsewhere, that when you were a single driver in a car where there was a 2-driver race, when it was your turn to do a pit stop, you had to get out of the car, sort of run round and jump back in again. So there was always that little bit of theatre, if you like. But certainly in the case of a single driver, you will just stop. The team will hit the stopwatch button, and then after 15 seconds wave you on. So Rudiger Friedrichs still with the fastest race lap, still with the lead, and a lead of 45 seconds actually ahead of the car that's now in second. The Ross Keeling, Callum Lockie, Delahaye yet to do their driver change. And there is the Aston Martin Ulster again being pressed quite firmly here. This is Edward Bradley in the 1935 Ulster. So Ed is, where is he? Looking down the order a little, in 18th place. So right behind him is the number 2 machine, Jonathan Lupton and Darren Turner in the Aston Martin team car. Now, Darren Turner did tell me yesterday afternoon that Jonathan Lupton, who owns the car, wasn't quite sure if he was going to race it or not. So we'll have to wait and see. I have to say that didn't particularly look like Darren Turner's helmet. We'll pick up on that as and when. It's still shown on the entry as Turner and Lupton. We'll wait and see. Here is the nimble look of a Fraser Nash. Now, take a look at this car, because much like a Citroën DS in later years, the front track is much wider. Ooh, a little bit of a get out of my way and use your mirrors. You Bentley driving old duffer indication there to one of his fellow competitors, clearly not entirely happy with the way that went. So the Fraser Nash with a much wider front track and a much narrower rear track, and of course with a car that's got no differential because it has a solid axle lashed to lots of chains, that means you have to slide the back a lot, which means you need lots of front end and not particularly lots of rear end grip. So exactly as you see here, steering it on the throttle, you get the nose in and then you drive it around the corner using the throttle and the rear wheels.
And that car now being driven by its second driver, Patrick Blakeney Edwards, who prepares the car for the owner, Fred Wakeman, who's not driving today. Gregor Fiskin started. Now, Gregor is no slouch. He's an ex-British GT driver. He's done a lot of racing, especially historic racing recently. But I suspect Patrick will be a little bit quicker because he's very much used to the car. So that's running in third place at the moment, having done its pit stop. And Patrick has already put the fastest lap of the race in. He's just done a 2:44.749, and you might say 2 3/4 minutes, that's not very quick round Silverstone, but don't forget this car was built in 1928. And Patrick is driving the wheels off it, as you saw in those pictures just then.
94 years young and being thrashed as if it was a brand new car. Well, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards has got the mechanical sympathy required for these cars, but he also has the driving style and the talent to get the best out of it. Goes by the Alta that we saw earlier on. That was putting a lap on that car. So at the moment, with their driver change completed, they are in the lead, and the top two cars yet to make their stop. So this is looking good for the Fraser-Nash. This is the car, of course, that did start from pole position. He's not just being a showboating, flamboyant show-off here. That is the way the car needs to be driven to get the best out of it.
If you want to see a racing car being driven on the limit, it doesn't matter what ultimate speed it's doing, and you want to see some sideways motoring, there's no better place than the BRDC 500 here at Silverstone, and within that, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards in Fred Wakeman's Fraser-Nash. It's just a joy to watch how he drifts this car through. He's a real Fraser-Nash fan. He's got a number of his own Fraser-Nash cars that he races, and here he comes into the not quite so tight entry into club that they use for Grand Prix racing, but now he's going through the normal club line, the tighter section that leads out onto the Hamilton straight. He gets past a slower car, pulls to the right, will go back into the left-hand side of the track to take the racing line. Typical for these drivers and typical of Patrick, he waves thank you to that driver for keeping out of his way, turns into the right-hander and then the left at Farm, and then it'll be up to Village, and this is where we'll see a little bit more of that sideways motoring. External gear lever again, just like the Morgan, turns in, gets the back sliding, and into the loop, the tight left-hander.
So the external gear lever in pre-war cars on the right-hand side, because most people are right-handed, and that's the hand that you use when you need rhythm, and you need rhythm to change a gear. And also it was easier to run the gear linkage on the outside of the car than it was to try and fiddle it through the inside. So pre-World War I, all cars were right-hand drive. You look at a pre-war Alfa Romeo, a pre-war whatever, they were all right-hand drive. Precisely for that reason, the same way that people normally had their right hand as their sword hand on a horse, and you passed right hand to right hand just in case you needed to battle the oncomer. And that's the way it worked when we went from horses to mechanical horses like this. So it was only post-World War II, really, that left-hand drive cars became, for some reason, a little bit more common, because you could still change gear with the same hand, but the gear lever, of course, in the middle of the car rather than the outside.
Well, here's Patrick Blakeney-Edwards coming up to Copse Corner, and in the pit lane, Rudiger Friedrichs, as you were talking, Martin, doing his pit stop, the leader, and Rudiger left the pit lane just as Patrick came through. Now let's check our screens. They are on the same lap, so we'll need to watch our live screens, and you out on the trackside, you'll see, does Rudiger come out behind Patrick? And I think he may well have done.
Yeah, the Delahaye also stopped on the previous lap as well, so Callum Lockie will be at the wheel of the Delahaye. There's the Alta once more being twirled around with great aplomb. Pit window remains open with less than 15 minutes to go. There is Gareth Burnett in the Alta. Has he just made his stop? No, he's yet to stop, so he's now back up into the top three in that car that was going very quickly on the opening lap. But has now, as we saw, he pulled off, he dropped back a little, but he is now in the top three. However, he does need to make a pit stop, and although you're only stationary for 15 seconds, of course, you've got to come down the pit lane at the pit lane speed limit, which is a little harder to organise in a pre-war car than it might in others. One of the Roche Talbots, the car that spun right at the beginning of the race, is in the pit lane as well, so a pit stop going on for that. And new fastest race lap again on this lap for 2 minutes 43.2. That's 2 seconds quicker than Friedrichs has managed for Patrick Blakeney-Edwards in the chain gang Fraser-Nash. So the Fraser-Nash does lead, and on this lap alone opened up that was the out lap for Rudiger Friedrich, so it's not quite a good indication, but fastest race lap has gone to the current leader, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards.
And you mentioned Gareth Burnett, he's just got past Rudy Friedrichs. I at the moment that's for position.
Yeah.
But according to our timing screen, Burnett has not yet been in the Alta into the pit lane. The pit window is still open, so he's got the option. He's coming down the Wellington Straight now, so he may well peel off into the pits this time. But of course that means Friedrichs is ahead again. So although it is a battle for position, it's not really going to play out that way. Rudiger some way ahead, but they're having a great battle on track, aren't they? Into Brooklands, Gareth Burnett on the outside, and the Rudiger.
Now, that's going to leave him stuffed if he wants to come into the pit lane this lap, and he does not. Timing screen does say that he has not gone into the pits yet, Gareth Burnett in third place. Pit window closes in 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and it is a 2-minute 40 lap, so he's going to be running it close. The window closes with 10 minutes to go, and Gareth Burnett has come into the pit lane now, so that was another car that we were watching. Gareth Burnett is in the pits, so with 2.5 minutes to go, through he comes. Here's Patrick Blakeney-Edwards once more in the Fraser-Nash, charging on, does have the lead over Rudiger Friedrichs. And Rudiger in the number 18 Albus Firefly Special. Fraser-Nash goes by Hugh Apthorpe in his Bentley 3.4.5. Hope he's not the same Bentley driver who was being chastised by Patrick a few laps ago in traffic. The Aston Martin Ulster, the red car, goes by on the straight as well. That's in a battle for position 2. Now then, here's less of a racing car and much more of a hill climber. Twin rear wheels were very much the thing in pre-war hill climbs because, well, the traction you required was extreme for hill climbs, and the surface was pretty grim in most cases. So you see a lot of pre-war hill climbers and some post-war cars also with twin rear wheels. That's an unusual setup. This car, number 78, John Burton, an SS 100, again shorn of its flamboyant flowing wheel arches. It doesn't really look like a road going SS 100 whatsoever, and it's the first time I've seen one, certainly with twin rear wheels. So again, whether it's actually helping him in terms of traction on this long, fast Silverstone circuit or not, only the driver and the team will know. And it's an unusual look for a race car, having those 4 rear tyres, as you so often saw with the early era of cars, with a lot of positive camber on the front wheels, which means that the inside edge of the front wheel is below and inside the outside edge, so they're sort of tilted in a bit. That's to allow the rear to do a bit more work than the front end.
The SS100, as it's listed in the programme, the forerunner of Jaguar, but they changed the name in 1945 for obvious reasons. If you know the history of what happened in 39 to 45 and the Nazis, they were the SS, so the name of the car, the company, was changed to one of the models. It used to be the SS Jaguar. They dropped the SS. Yeah,
originally it was Swallow Cars.
Swallow Sidecar Company.
Yeah,
yes.
There you go. That's where the SS came from. But as you say, yes, post World War II, not the initials you particularly wanted to have hanging around. So Jaguar became the mark that continues to this day. So William Lyons, the designer and founder of the company. Pit window is now closed, so everybody has stopped, and the cars made 2 stops actually. So our race leader now, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards, easing away, and there's big trouble for a big Bentley. And that is a lot of oil chugging out of the 4.5 litre engine, I'm afraid. Simon Llewellyn bringing the car to a halt.
The Llewellyns, another Bentley family, along with the Morleys. Been racing Bentleys for many years, but that one does not look as though it's going to go any further. Not today, that's for sure. So 98 years old, that car, built in 1924 originally. Maybe a little bit like the Woodsman's Axe or Trigger's Broom. Shouldn't think that too much of the chassis has been changed over the years. They were famous for the rigidity of their chassis, but may well have had an awful lot of other work to keep it racing over almost a century. Now, a lot of these cars, again, are right up at that age. There is, you can see the white stripe, that's the
quick dry that's down, but there's also a dark strip there. It's well off the racing line, fortunately, but if you were thinking of a big move down the inside into Stowe, it might suddenly become an awful lot bigger of a move than you were planning.
That really tells the story, doesn't it? The oil line starting about halfway down the Hanger Straight, where the car would have been at maximum speed, and something in the engine let go.
Yeah.
We're back with Rudiger Friedrichs, who's been trying very hard to close in on the leader, but Patrick Blakeney-Edwards has consistently put faster times in, around a couple of seconds a lap, so he stretched the lead out over Friedrichs to about 15 seconds now. But Friedrichs hasn't given up, and he's well ahead of Gareth Burnett, who I think would have been closer to this lead battle as Rudiger goes very wide, goes off into the next county. In fact, I think he was in Buckinghamshire there. But the Gareth Burnett Alta, of course, had that problem at the beginning of the race, and that really lost him so much time.
Yeah, had to pull over at the side and obviously had a little kind of think about what was going on, seemed to be okay and carried on. But you're right, once you've given away that sort of time, then it's very hard indeed. This is a very competitive field, as you can see. Despite the vintage of the cars, the drivers are still probably driving with the sort of a plumb that they were pedalled in period, going around the outside of Duncan Wiltshire's Bentley 3 litre, one of the rare 3 litres that's still a 3 litre. There is your race leader.
Unusually, Duncan's sharing with William Elborn this weekend. Duncan is actually the man behind Motor Racing Legends, which puts on this race and a number of other grids this weekend. And just a very quick story about that car. It was a farm plough, or dragged a farm plough at one time, just to confirm that once upon a time, old Bentleys weren't really worth anything. It was just a machine that the farmer used, handy. It's got lots of power. I'll pull my plough along with it. But of course, Duncan Wiltshire has had a long-term renovation on that car, beautifully prepared now.
Yeah, so in the days when you needed a tractor, but a vintage Bentley or an old nail, as it was then, was a much cheaper option even than a grey Fergie. So, and probably with a lot more torque as well. Yes. Now look at that, 3 wide there. 42 on the outside, that's David Cook's Alfa Romeo 8C Monza. In the centre was the Aston Martin Ulster, the red car, nibbling around at the back of the Alfa and going through past both of them, the Fraser-Nash. Ooh, and squeezing through as well past car number 8, Max Sauby and Marcus Black's Talbot Largo. So again, so many names from the pre-war eras that, well, this is pre-World War II, just post-World War I, so the early days of motoring. Motor cars were only about 3 decades old by this stage, and a whole host of these names sort of withered on the vine in the immediate post-war years and are no longer around. Very few of them continuing to make cars. Among them, Bentley still do, Aston Martin still do. Don't think you can go and buy a current Invicta or Talbot anymore, can you?
A lot of the names were subsumed into larger companies, weren't they, and combined, and then sadly big company mentality is you get rid of the name. Some of them were revived as models within the range, which is always nice to see. But names like Fraser-Nash, which was really a very strong mark in period, and still very strong in this race, but doesn't appear on a price list anywhere these days. No,
but the name is still in the motoring business, isn't it? Archie Fraser-Nash, AFN. AFN garages in West London, still going to this day, so maybe not the manufacturing cars any longer, but still in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. The name Fraser-Nash still appears as an engineering company down in Bristol at Filton, so yeah, it does exist, but no longer making cars.
And of course, an awful number of the early car manufacturers didn't start in motoring because there was no motoring, but came from things like bicycle manufacturing or iron foundry, or all sorts of different engineering rose in, or just people who wanted to make, as Harley and Davidson did, wanted to make motorized bicycles and went ahead and did it in a shed. So many of these brands bear the name of one founder who had a passion and a drive, as Fraser-Nash do. Archie Fraser-Nash was the man who had the passion and the drive to create his own car and then sell cars to people that wanted something very similar. Same with W.O. Bentley. He created a brand out of thin air.
Lovely sight as they come down the Hanger Straight, led by the leader of the race, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards, in Fred Wakeman's Fraser Nash, ably assisted in the first part of the race by Gregor Fiskin, the car salesman, if you could call him that, the Marks, top Marks salesman. Yeah. And he a very good driver indeed, but Patrick has taken over the car and really stamped his authority on this race with an 18-second lead now over Rudiger Friedrichs in second place, Gareth Burnett in third, and then the very well driven, a car that I haven't seen race in one of this in this series recently, the Delahaye, which was started by Ross Keeling and taken over by Callum Lockie. We haven't seen much of that car. It's been back in the pack, but it's running in fourth place, so very well driven indeed, the Delahaye, which was up on the second row.
Yeah, so started fourth, currently in fourth place, so qualifying did not necessarily mislead us too much. In fifth place is car number 59. Now we saw that a little bit earlier on, and that is Roger Beebe in his Fraser Nash TT replica. But then there's a very tight battle between him and the car in sixth position. So they're running in close company. Clive Morley in car number 22, the Bentley 4.5 litre. So you'll have the little Fraser Nash with the big Bentley all over the back of it. Here is the Delahaye. There's the Fraser Nash we were talking about, Roger Beebe's car, and that sort of bright green, very definitely not British racing green, more of an emerald green, and the Bentley is right behind. So Robert Beebe in car number 59, bright green with the yellow helmet, and the Bentley, well, not quite all over the back of him, but almost over the top of him, pressing on. And that Bentley, Morley's Bentley, or the Morley family Bentley, with some very small lights at the front. You can see some of the other Bentleys with the enormous Bentley headlights, or traditional side road headlights, but this with much smaller headlights. Of course, a little bit better for top speed and aerodynamics.
Nice to see the registration plate still on that car.
Yes.
GSU is, would that be a Scottish registration perhaps? And an MV registration on this one really shows their road car origins. And
I should think most of these, although they're way beyond needing an MOT, would be very happily road legal. The Bentley may have a slight advantage there, but also the Fraser Nash might have a slight problem. Robert Beebe pulling over there, and I thought suddenly that the Bentley had found an extra gear, but quite possibly actually the TT has found no gears whatsoever. Now he did actually select neutral, so it's possibly not a gearbox issue. That might look like a bit of a terminal engine problem for the Fraser Nash, and that's a real shame. Top 5 finish gone, and that moves Clive Morley up into fifth place in the number 22 Bentley. There he is. And again, a slightly brighter colour than the traditional British racing green of Bentleys. Of course, stop looking down in the cockpit now that you've just inherited a place. Now that is definitely a driver who's got issues. He is looking way down in the cockpit. He's not pumping up the fuel pressure. He is definitely looking at something. Well, when you get to the corners, you've got to pay a little bit more attention than when you're on the Wellington Straight. The car sort of drives itself in a straight line. Clive Morley twirling at the wheel.
Looks to be okay, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Oh, no, he's definitely worried about something. Now, he's going to come past us in a moment. Is he misfiring? Let's listen. No. All 4 cylinders thumping away as God intended, or WO at least. And I believe that was what he was known as in the factory. So he's still going, as is our leader, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards, in the Fraser Nash that was started by Gregor Fiskin. Now in the previous race, although it had 2 drivers on the entry, it turns out that only one did all the racing. We do think that both drivers have had a go in this one. That is definitely definitely Blakeney-Edwards at the wheel now.
And I've only gone down as far as 6th, and I think I'm right in saying 7th. In fact, 7 different makes in the top 7, 8 different makes in the top 8 actually. Amazing. What a whole range of vehicles, all different, some small, some large, some chain driven, some with gearboxes. Absolutely amazing in this pre-war race as they're on their last lap now.
Final lap of the Grand Prix circuit at Silverstone for Patrick Blakeney-Edwards. Gets a little wave by from, I think that was Jock McKinnon in the Bentley Tourer, car number 10. So through the Beckett's S's. And if you see anybody doing this in a Grand Prix car, it'll be because it is absolutely soaking wet. But it's definitely the way that this car demands to be driven. You get the front end heading in roughly the right direction and then do the rest on the throttle. Talbot Lago coming towards us, leading in that bright pea green livery of the Roche Talbots, and here is the race leader heading into Stowe for the final time. He'll drop down into the Vale, and when he pops out at the other end of this slight depression through Club Corner, the checkered flag will be waiting. Time has been called, gentlemen, please, on the BRDC 500s after 40 minutes of entertaining racing. The car started by Gregor Fiskin and now driven by Patrick Blakeney-Edwards takes the checkered flag. It is victory for the Fraser-Nash TT replica. The chain gang car wins ahead of the car that was alongside it on the grid. This car was on pole position, courtesy of some sterling stuff in qualifying from the man behind the wheel now, Patrick Blakeney-Edwards. And Rudiger Friedrichs in the Albis Firefly Special. Car number 18 comes across the line in second place. Again, enterprisingly driven, highly entertaining to watch throughout qualifying and in the race. And Rudiger Friedrichs takes second spot on the podium. Behind him should be Gareth Burnett in the RAF Blue Alta. Burnett was right in the fray. He qualified third, and he will end up in third place in that Alta Sports. Car number 70. Yeah, bright RAF blue on the car. Car from 1939. So it looks as though it was part of the support for the exhaust that came loose on lap 1. The exhaust pipe and the silence itself are sort of attached. He's probably got used to the clanking when it bounces over the bumps. And Burnett comes across the line in third place. So waving to the crowd. Thumbs up from Patrick Blakeney-Edwards, our race winner. Well, the top three on the grid were the top three in the race. Nothing much happened there, did it? So often, looking at the grid sheet and the race results tells you very little of what went on. In fourth place was the Delahaye. That started fourth as well. Ross Keeling doing the initial stint, and Callum Lockie in his first drive of the weekend. He's driving, I think, up to half a dozen cars this weekend. One of the busiest men in historic racing. So he will be in fourth in the Delahaye, the bright blue and slightly upright car number 135 as they come across the line. And fifth place, Clive Morley in one of the Morley family Bentleys. Makes them sound like landed gentries. Like landed gentry, not quite so. Definitely a family that has Bentley. If you cut them in the middle, you'll definitely see the wing badge, I think, with the B in the middle. They have several sheds full of vintage Bentleys, which they race and pour love and affection into. And there is car number 42. And where did that finish? That was 14th place. So that is David Cook in the 8C Monza. 8C standing for Otto Cilindri, or something approximating that in Italian, 8 cylinders. And the Monza nomenclature, of course, from Alfa Romeo's home track. So, very unusual colour on that 8C Monza. Traditionally, you'd expect to see them in Rosso Corsa, the Italian racing colours, but that two-tone blue livery, very different. And there is another exciting livery, Richard Iliff in a Riley Kestrel Sports, car number 29. The pale green Roche Talbot colours of car number 20. And that's Michael Birch, who spun early on in the Talbot AV 105. One of the Talbot Le Mans team that raced in period together. And Bentley, of course, so successful at Le Mans, despite the initial reluctance of W.O. Bentley to allow to allow, by the way, not just to develop his cars to race at Le Mans, but to allow customers to race his cars at Le Mans. The side of the road, Simon Llewellyn's, the Llewellyn family Bentley. That's another 3-litre chassis with the 4.5-litre engine. And that was chucking out a lot of smoke. Hopefully that's just a seal or a leaking pipe rather than anything mechanical. However, let's see what our centenarians or non-arians managed. These cars nearly 100 years old, racing in the BRDC 500. The race for our pre-war sports cars. It was the pole sitters, Gregor Fiskin and Patrick Blakeney-Edwards, who took victory from second place starter Rudiger Friedrichs in the Alvis Firefly Special. Third on the grid, Gareth Burnett finished to complete the podium ahead of fourth fastest starters Keeling and Lockie. The Morley family Bentley rose to fifth ahead of Michael Birch in the spinning Talbot. And then Alan Middleton, Ewan Getley, Alexander Hewitson and the Hudson and Morley Bentley finishing in the top 10. Remarkably little mechanical carnage in this field, considering that the youngest of the cars is 88 years old and the oldest 98 years old. A fantastic mouth-watering array of pre-war sports cars driven with great speed and style. And unfortunately for Simon Llewellyn and Sue Derbyshire and the low chassis Invicta, which retired early on, not all of them making it all the way through. Racing sports cars of nearly 100 years old sounds like hard work, but it seemed to be extremely enjoyable for all of the competitors in the BRDC 500. Whether you had 3 wheels on your wagon or 4, certainly plenty of variety in the field. The size and power of the Bentleys versus the lightweight of cars like the Morgan, the Alvis, the Altas, and the ones that came out on top in the end, the Fraser-Nashes. Plenty of opportunity to pit brands new and old against each other. Lots with long family history, and all of them well into their 9th decade. Driven in a way that would put many new cars under a lot of pressure, but the winners from pole position, the Fraser-Nash.